You're listening to the Divorce and Your Money Show, the #1 divorce podcast in the United States. I'm your host, Sean Lehman, MBA and certified divorce financial analyst. Be sure to get a copy of my new book called, surprise, surprise, Divorce and Your Money, How to Avoid Costly Divorce Mistakes. You can get a copy on Amazon or by visiting divorceandyourmoney.com. While you're on the website, be sure to book a strategy session with me. We have 30-minute strategy sessions, and you have two options. One in which where you can just speak directly about issues that apply to you, regardless of whether you're at the beginning of the divorce, thinking about what you want to do, in the middle, trying to figure out the right path to take, or at the end of your divorce and you're trying to figure out the best options for you. And also there we have a document review appointment where we can review your financial affidavit, your divorce settlement, or other documents related to your divorce, and also include a strategy session on top of that to make sure that whatever you're preparing or about to sign is in your best interest. With that, on to this week's episode. Today I want to talk about a very basic and essential topic that is worth your understanding and understanding the nuances of it, and that is spousal support. And when I talk about spousal support, I also mean alimony in there as well. Spousal support or alimony is the same term used interchangeably, and if sometimes I'll refer to it as spousal support, sometimes I might say alimony, but know that they are the exact same thing. And there's a lot of details that you should know about alimony or spousal support, and I want to make sure you understand the basics of it. And let's start with just a simple definition. And what it is court-ordered provision of money for one spouse after divorce, or sometimes separation as well. And spousal support is a very important concept. You may be on the paying end of support, you may be on the receiving end. But oftentimes, people ask, well, why do I have to pay support? Or shouldn't I be receiving spousal support? And you should kind of understand why it exists. Very simply, one spouse pays the other money, usually on a semi-regular basis. And the reason it exists is because most of the time, both spouses don't have equal resources. And usually, one spouse earns more than the other. And to make up for that difference, they have spousal support. And particularly in a longer marriage, where if you've been married for a long time and if you're getting divorced and one spouse didn't work or barely worked part-time, that income difference can be substantial, sometimes in the hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in difference. And so spousal support is there to make sure that the lower earning spouse does not end up without any form of income after the divorce process is over. And why it came into play, if you look at the history of spousal support, why it even exists, is actually once upon a time, you could get divorced, but oftentimes the wife, if we're assuming traditional gender roles, the wife would be left destitute. The husband, who was, had some sort of profession many, many decades ago before divorce laws evolved, would work the job. The wife would stay at home, if you think of the traditional family as it used to be. And before spousal support, if a wife were to get divorced, the wife would have no money and they would have to start over with basically nothing. They would be destitute. And so spousal support was enacted by just about every state to minimize that from happening and keep that from happening in the situation of divorce. Like other evolutions in divorce include like no-fault divorce laws, which I've talked about on the podcast. It used to be the case where you had to prove a reason that you were getting divorced. Now you can get divorced for any reason at all in any state. Look, there's pros and cons and whatnot to everything, but just want to give a little bit of context there. Now, the big question that I get asked a lot is, how much alimony am I going to get? And the answer to that is it depends. And there are numerous factors that are considered. Now, every state has its own nuances to how spousal support is determined. Some of them It's a little bit more formulaic. More often, it is almost just whatever you and your spouse agree to or whatever a court decides is the amount of support that's going to be paid. And there are very few guidelines. And particularly for my California listeners, I work with a lot of people in California, a lot of people in New York. Now, I work with people everywhere, but in those two states in particular, the question is, how much support am I going to pay? And the answer is, well, we're going to have to figure it out and negotiate it, because it's not a hard and fast rule in terms of spousal support. So there are a lot of nuances to the spousal support question and what financial status means. And trying to give a bunch of examples is a little bit tricky because everyone's situation is different, and depending on state and income level and savings and earnings, etc. So I won't try and dive into 50 different examples of ways spousal support might be calculated just based on the financial status question, but something to think about. The next issue is living conditions and lifestyle. Some people who make $500,000 a year spend $600,000 a year, which means they have a lot of debt. I also know families who make $500,000 a year who spend $80,000 a year, and they save a substantial amount of money every year. The point is that lifestyles can vary dramatically between families. And if you are in the situation where you or your spouse doesn't spend very much money, there may be the case for lower support amounts going forward. Now, it doesn't apply in every state and every situation, but something to think about. Earning potential. This is a very important topic in terms of how the spousal support conversation can go, and one that we do a lot of coaching calls around, and that is the spouse that's receiving support. What is their educational level? Are they able to earn funds on their own? Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no. Or sometimes the answer is, well, after a few years, they may be able to. If you're a younger couple, let's just say in your 40s is a good example, or younger, and you're getting divorced, it's not very realistic almost anywhere in the country to believe that the spouse who's receiving spousal support is supposed to never work again. And so the question becomes, what is that person's earning potential? Now, if you've never graduated college or don't have any formal education, maybe the answer is, well, we're going to assume you can earn a minimum wage job, and that's your earning potential. But conversely, if you have a master's degree, but have only been out of the workforce for 3 years, and you can probably get a job with a little bit of extra training or something like that, a 6-figure job, then that could be factored in to the spousal support calculation. So there's a lot of question in terms of earning potential that needs to be determined by spouse. I've also talked in the past on the podcast about vocational experts who will, if there's not an agreement about one spouse's earning potential, can come up with an agreement about earning potential and do an analysis of a spouse's possibilities in the job market. That is something that could factor into the spousal support discussion. Age. Age is very simple. The older you are, usually the more likely that one spouse will be receiving support. And also, the more likely it is that support may be longer, and that the other spouse isn't expected to go find a high-paying job over time. Because, if you're 61 and you're getting divorced and you're expecting to receive support, well, most likely the case that you will be receiving spousal support for an extended period of time, and they're not expecting you to go rejoin the workforce and get a job, particularly if you've been married for a while, which also brings me to the last point of length of the marriage. And if you've been married for a long time, 10 years, 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, longer, the longer you have been married, the more likely you're going to receive some form of support, and for a longer period of time. Now, it's not always a super clean and easy thing to figure out in terms of timing and how long and how much, but there is a correlation between the length of the marriage and the amount of support you receive. Sometimes I talk to people who've been married for 3 years or 5 years, and they want 10 years of support. That is unlikely. You will usually get paid for, now every state differs. Some states have rules, and you should look up your state's laws, where if you've been married for over 20 years, it's automatically assumed that you're going to get support for the rest of your life. Other states, it's a fraction of the time. But one of the things to think about is how long you've been married and how much support you will receive. For planning purposes, I use an estimate. If the state doesn't have a law, I usually estimate around a third to a half of the time you've been married for support for planning purposes, both for the payer and for the person receiving. So if you've been married for 10 years, I assume usually somewhere between 3 and 5 years of spousal support. Now, every situation is completely different, but if I were doing just a rough guess, a rough calculation, someone were to come to me and say, here's the support agreement that's on the table, here's what's the state doesn't really have any real guidelines. If it's somewhere in that third to a half of the amount of time you've been married, assuming the couples are of younger, so meaning early 50s at the latest, but usually 40s or 30s, that would strike me as a reasonable amount of time. But as I said, every situation is different. In the next episodes, I want to discuss some other nuances to spousal support, such as the different types of support and what special circumstances may exist where spousal support might be longer or unchangeable, and some of the pros and cons of those different options. Now, before you go, I want to make sure you get some really important information. I'm going to tell you about a few things that may be of interest to you. First, as a favor, is if you could leave a review. If you're on the iTunes store, leave a review on iTunes, or if you search Divorce and Your Money on a website called Trustpilot or on Google, you can leave a review there. It's quick, it's anonymous, it only takes a few seconds, and I really, really appreciate your feedback. I have lots of reviews on iTunes and on Trustpilot, and I appreciate hearing your stories. Also, on divorceandyourmoney.com, you can get lots of great information. Of course, you can book a 30-minute strategy session directly with me. There's 2 types of strategy calls you can book. Just a normal strategy session, which we discuss the questions that are most pressing to you, regardless of where you are in the divorce process, be at the beginning, towards the end, or in the middle. Doesn't really matter. There's lots of great information we can cover during that strategy call. And also, we have a document review call. It's been one of the biggest things that we've done over the past year, which is you can send me your documents, be it your financial affidavit, a settlement agreement, or other documents that you would like for me to review. And then I review those in advance of the call, and then we get to discuss them in depth as part of a strategy session and get specific answers to some of the specific documents and things that you are considering. Also, for those who need ongoing support, we do have a few options for ongoing support, but regardless, it all starts with a coaching call that you can book at divorceandyourmoney.com. Don't forget to also get a copy of my new book. It's called Divorce and Your Money: How to Avoid Costly Divorce Mistakes. It's available on my website or also on Amazon. You just look me up and make sure you get the new edition. It is filled with excellent information regarding the divorce process, and I know that you will find it helpful. And once you've read the book, be sure to leave a review. That really helps me. I appreciate your feedback, and it also helps other people as they try and find this information. And finally, last but not least by any means, is on the store at divorceandyourmoney.com. If you click on the store button, you can get access to the full archive of podcast episodes. There's over 200 episodes, and what's great about the store link is that the episodes are organized in neat buckets. And they're organized by topic, so it's very easy to follow along with the information. And it is easy to pick out the key topics that matter most to you. And you can get all of those podcast episodes in the store. Thank you so much for listening. I'm your host, Sean Lehman, MBA and Certified Divorce Financial Analyst. Take care.